by their enemies. Now, he did this because he hated Mordecai, and therefore he wanted to kill all the Jews. Then later, we looked at last week, Mordecai was able to write another decree that on the same day, the Jews would be able to defend themselves. So we have two decrees written that oppose each other on this one day. And that sets the stage for what we're calling the Feast of Purim. Now, Haman's decree was written in the 12th year of the reign of Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, and it was written in the first month of the year, on the 13th day of the month. So Nisan, the 13th, or also called Abib. This month is also called Abib, which gets confusing because later in the year there's a month called A-B. And so is it Ab or Abib? But yes, so it gets confusing. So they've changed this one perhaps to Nisan. The 13th of Nisan is the day before Passover. So and we talked about this before, in the city of Susa, in the capital city, this decree came out the day before Passover. All right, put yourself in their shoes. It's Christmas Eve. You're planning for a big Christmas. The kids are watching the skies for Santa Claus. We had all the parties. We got all the presents wrapped. We've done all the secret stuff. Everybody's excited. The goose is in the oven. I mean, everything's ready, and the phone rings. What tragic news could you receive that would just completely annihilate all the festival joys of Christmas? Okay, that's what happened to the Jews. Anticipating the day they were going to sacrifice the Passover lamb and celebrate their exodus from Egypt that we've talked about in our Sunday morning sermons, and all the stuff, and you get this poster put on the walls all over the city that on this particular date, 12 months from now, you're going to be killed, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's the devastating news that went out. Now, Haman's decree issued that on the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the 13th day of that month, so 12 months later, the Jews are to be destroyed. They're to be killed, annihilated, destroyed, and all their stuff taken. Their plunder, as we would call it, goes to their killers. Now think of how this would make us feel if something like this came across upon top of us. Now, Mordecai's decree was written in the third month, the 23rd day, which is the month Sivan. So Sivan the 23rd, 3 months and 10 days, if we count exactly, or try to get exact, from Haman's decree, Mordecai's decree comes out. So we've got this 3-month period of utter anguish. I'll ponder that for a little bit. Here we are. We've been told that on this date, 12 months from now, we're going to be destroyed. We can't do anything about it. And so we are worried. We're concerned. We think, what can we do to get out of town? Well, there's no way to get out of town because wherever you go, this decree has gone throughout the whole province. There's no place to go because the Persian Empire covered everything. Basically, you weren't getting out. You were doomed. And finally, 3 months later, you get this next decree from Mordecai that on this day, you get a chance to defend yourselves. So the sudden sense of relief that comes upon them. Haman's decree was sent out to, and read very carefully what it says, to the 127 satraps, governors, and princes of the 127 provinces of the empire. Notice the address. They are to kill, destroy, and annihilate all the Jews and seize their possessions. Mordecai's decree, by contrast, was written to the Jews, not to the Jewish leaders, not to the Jewish governors, not to the Jewish fathers, but to the Jews, all of them, and to the satraps, governors, provinces of the 127 provinces. So everybody, including the Jews. So he added an additional address to his letter. The Jews were to assemble and defend themselves against their enemies. And they were to kill and annihilate any of their enemies and seize their possessions. Notice the difference. Haman's decree was just to the leadership. Mordecai's decree was to the Jews as well. In Haman's decree, they could do nothing but stand there. In Mordecai's decree, they were to assemble and defend themselves. So it wasn't that they just walked around with knives and swords killing anybody. They assembled as a group and stood as a group to defend any enemy against them. Now, you can't help but think, how many enemies did the Jews have? And I read this somewhere, and I don't know how accurate it is. So, again, throw a big question mark around this, or quotation marks and big question mark of doubt, that throughout the ages, the Jews have been a hated race. Now, I know the Germans hated them, or Hitler did, and that's evidenced by the Holocaust. And there are others that didn't like the Jews, but somewhere I read that the Jews were just not liked by anybody. And I don't know how accurate that might be and why that might be. But they must have had a lot of enemies in the empire. But watch how all of this table gets turned around in favor of the Jews. Chapter 9, Adar the 13th. Chapter 9 seems to be, at least the first section we're going to read, seems to be a group of statements that are not necessarily in chronological order. It's kind of an unorderly thing here. And it's almost like at this point, the author has changed his habit of writing. It's like all of a sudden he came back to the desk and something was wrong or different in his brain cells, and he just wasn't writing the same organized format. So as we read through this, be ready to kind of jump back and forth, because it's not all together in sequence. Beginning in verse 1 of Esther chapter 9. In the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, it was turned to the contrary. It was turned to the contrary, so that the Jews themselves gained the mastery over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand before them, for the dread of them had fallen on all the peoples. Even all the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's business assisted the Jews, because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai became greater and greater. Then the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. Okay, here's the deal. In this 9 months between the writing of Mordecai's decree and Adar the 13th, attitudes throughout the Persian Empire change. The satraps, the princes of the provinces, had been told to kill the Jews. But after Mordecai's decree and the elevation of Mordecai and the influence of Mordecai, instead of instigating their armies to fight against the Jews, these leaders are assisting the Jews. How? I don't know. Did they call on and say, hey, look, y'all need swords and spears and stuff? We got plenty of armor. Come help yourself. Defend yourselves. Did the satraps and governors and rulers, princes, did they get their armies to go out and help fight with the Jews instead of against them? Did they stand beside them and back them up? Did he give them battle plans? I don't know. But they were assisting the Jews because the dread of Mordecai was upon them. The dread of the Jews was upon them. Something in all of this was taking place behind the scenes in their attitudes that we don't see, that changed the whole outcome and turned the tables in favor of the Jews. Verse 6. At the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Portha, Adaliah, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vizatha. I think I said those right. It don't matter. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Jews' enemy, but they did not lay their hands on their plunder. Why these 10 sons are specifically named and nobody else is named is a big question. And what's weird is, in the copies of the book of Esther, the handwritten copies, these names are written in a different style of type. Okay, so when you write in different forms, right? Don't we? Yeah. Sometimes I'll write in all capital letters, especially if somebody else has to read it. If I have to read it, I have to read it before the ink dries or I'm in trouble. If I scribble it out there. Okay? My father could print in such a way it looked like a typewriter. He could print in such a way it looked like he'd written with the typewriter. No, I can't do that. No possible way. He didn't always do that, but he could. Okay, so we can print and write in different ways. So when they got to these names, they would write them differently with a different stroke of the pen, or a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, and a different format. And it's interesting, I'll get to this again later, help me, don't let me forget, that in the Feast of Purim, they would read the book of Esther. And when they got to these names, they had to be read in one breath. No, I ain't going to do it that way. But I thought about this, reading over this. Haman was proud of his 10 sons. Why did he give them those names? Can you imagine as they're going out in the back porch and calling him in to supper? I mean, the biscuits get cold before you get them all called. You think about that. Why these names? Well, they had a different baby name book than we've got, which I guess is good. Okay, but anyway. So, verse 11, on that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel was reported to the king. Verse 12, the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? That is not a question. That's a statement. They've killed 500 men in the citadel. They have killed the 10 sons of Haman. What else have they done? Not a question. Throughout the empire. Now, what is your petition? Now, I don't know if she had raised her hand and said, I got a question, King. But he came in and he told her, he reported to her, this is what has happened. Now, what was Esther doing that the king would have to come in and tell her what had been going on? Why was she not standing at the window? Had the news turned on and listening? Why is it the king had to come and tell her? Well, first place, nobody else could come in. But why does she have to be thus informed? But then he asked, what is your petition? It shall be granted. What is your further request? It shall be done. Notice he didn't say to half of the kingdom this time. Then said Esther, if it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded that it should be done so, and an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa assembled also on the 14th day of the month Adar, and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to defend their lives and rid themselves of their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This was done on the 13th day of the month Adar. On the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and the 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. Therefore the Jews of the rural areas who live in the rural towns make the 14th day of the month of Adar a holiday for rejoicing and feasting and sending portions of food to one another. Now, if you get confused, I'll see if I can make it muddy up the waters a little bit here. On the 13th day, everybody in the empire fought. All the Jews defended themselves and killed their enemies. 500 men in the citadel 75,000 men in the rest of the empire. On the 14th, the folks in the empire outside of the citadel feasted and rejoiced. The people in the citadel of Susa killed another 300 men. On the 15th, they feasted and rejoiced. But my question stands, what was Esther doing? I'll come to that in a minute. Keep that question in mind. So that's what's going on. So they've got two things happening here at once, and all this kind of unorderly, I think. But in essence, the Jews gained the mastery over their enemies because of the dread the people had of the Jews and the greatness of Mordecai. What caused that dread and that greatness? In Susa, 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman. And then Esther said, have them put on the gallows. Have them, their bodies impaled. But note, they did not take the plunder. Now that was part of the decree. Assemble, defend yourselves, and take their plunder. But they did not. Now, in preparing for all this, I've been reading several different commentaries. And one that I read, I got thinking, I said, where in the world is this one coming from? And we said this before back in the beginning. Haman was an Agagite. And most commentaries try to make out that Mordecai was descended from Kish, the father of Saul, and then Haman was descended from Agag, the king of the Amalekites, that Saul was supposed to kill. And he didn't. Back up to 1 Samuel. There is no basis for that because the time frame doesn't work out. There is a province of the Persian Empire called Agag, and it makes better sense that Haman was from that province. But if you're stuck on having Haman kin to Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and Mordecai kin to Saul, the king of Israel, then this age-long Civil War duel, or what's the right word here? The Hatfields and the Course. What's the right word? What were they? Feud. There we go. This long-term feud that went on for ages is now come to a close. Well, they try to take this and build it up, and this is no. This was personal. This was not age-old. This was between these, between Haman and Mordecai. So don't make anything out of that. But what caused this not take the plunder? Abraham, you remember Genesis 14 when Chedorlaomer and the other kings of the north from Babylon came down and wore out the nations or tribes on the east side of the Jordan River. And when I say wore out, it was not an easy thing to do. There wasn't Israel there. The Rephaim, the giants, and other mighty people. And they took Sodom and Gomorrah because they quit paying taxes. And they took with them Lot and his family and such. So Abraham took his 318 servants and went out and destroyed the kings and brought back everybody. And the king of Sodom came out and said, you need to take some of the spoil for yourself. And Abraham said, I'm not going to do it because I don't want people to think that you made me rich. What he's saying is, I want you to understand that God has blessed me and made me rich, not anything you've given me. Because later on, it's going to say, Abraham sure is a rich man. Yeah. You remember when he fought that battle and won all that stuff? We gave him all those sheep. That's what happened. He's rich. No, that ain't going to fly. Abraham didn't allow that to happen. He would not take the plunder. And so these commentaries say, well, it's a holy war, and in a holy war you don't take the plunder. And then we've got other cases they try to bring up and say this is why they didn't take the plunder. This is not a holy war. Folks, this is self-defense. This is not a fight that God ordained like he ordained Saul to kill Amalek. This is a fight that two men started. Basically, one man started, and Mordecai finished it. And the point is that they just didn't take the plunder. They did not seize what was rightfully theirs. What's the old adage, to the victor goes the spoils? They didn't take the spoils. Why? We're never told. We're only left to guess. Although it was part of the decree. Throughout the empire, some 75,000 were killed. There are some, and we said this at the beginning, there are some who think that the book of Esther should not be in the Bible. It does not mention God in any shape, form, or fashion, and the list goes on. And one of the arguments is there is no possible way to kill 75,000 people in one day in the empire. Now, I'm not a history buff. How many troops died on D-Day? Not just Allied, but Allied and German. How many people died on D-Day? Thousands. I don't know the count, but thousands. If we can do that in one day on one battlefield, you talk about an empire that covered from Ethiopia to India to Macedonia. It's not hard to figure out how to kill 75,000 people. If we could kill 500 in one city, just do the math. It's not hard to have 75,000 executed in self-defense on one day throughout the empire. In Susa, they did it again on the 14th day at Esther's request. Why? Was she being mean? Was she being cruel? And the next day was a feast and gift giving. Now, think about that for just a minute. We're going to spend this day defending ourselves, killing our enemies, and tomorrow we're going to eat and pass out presents. Did they go to Walmart before they went to battle and buy the gifts? You know, I don't know. But the next day was a gift, feast, and all right, chapter 9, verse 20. From here to the end of the book is kind of a summary. So let's kind of read this together. Excuse me. Then Mordecai recorded these events. He sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. Hang on a minute. Obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of enemies, and it was a month that was turned for them from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Thus the Jews undertook what they started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the adversary of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is a lot, to destroy them and destroy them. Disturb them, destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should return on his own head, that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur, because of the instructions in this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them. The Jews established and made a custom for themselves and for their descendants and for all those who had allied themselves with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to the regulation and according to their appointed time annually. So these days were to be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews, or their memory fade from their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter about Purim. He sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely, words of peace and truth, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves and for their descendants, with instructions for their times of fasting and their lamentations. That doesn't fit, does it? Hang on. The command of Esther established these customs for Purim, and it was written in the book. Now King Ahasuerus laid a tribute on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the accomplishments of his authority and strength, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and in favor with his many kinsmen, one who sought the good of his people, and one who spoke for the welfare of his whole nation. The book of Esther fits between chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra. Now, if you go to chapter 7 of Ezra, he starts about talking about the reign of Artaxerxes, who is the successor to Xerxes or Ahasuerus. What made Artaxerxes so willing to allow Ezra to go to Jerusalem and later allow Nehemiah to go to Jerusalem? Can it be the dread of Mordecai? The influence that Mordecai had on the kingdom at that point? What caused that dread? There are several feasts and festivals of the Jews. Kind of review those right quick. First, there's the Sabbath. What does the word Sabbath mean? You can answer. Rest? No. Yeah, rest. Normally the answer is Sabbath, but seventh, no. 7 means seventh. Sabbath means rest. In the beginning, God created the world. 6 days he worked for creation. The seventh day, he didn't rest, because God don't get tired. He ceased the creative work. That's what the word means there. And he appointed to Moses, not to Abraham, not to Adam and Eve, not to Cain and Abel, not to Noah, not to anybody else, to Abraham, no. To Moses, God said, 6 days I worked in creation, 7th day I rested. You work 6 days, you rest on the 7th day. Keep the 7th day holy. Set apart from the other 6 days. These 6 days are work. The 7th day is a day of rest. So they had a Sabbath day. And there were several days that were not the 7th day that were Sabbaths. There was a Sabbath year. Every 7th year was a sabbatical year. They were not to plant or harvest. Whatever came out in the 6th year was supposed to carry them through. The 50th year was the year of Jubilee. Now, if you're any good at math, you would realize that the 49th year was a sabbatical year, and the 50th year was a sabbatical year. 2 years in a row, they did not work. How'd they live? God would take care of them. God also commanded the Passover in Abib or Nisan the 14th. That's coming up on our calendar, April the 16th. I think I got it right there. Okay? That's on our calendar. The Feast of Unleavened Bread began the Sunday after and went for a week. So that's going to be what we call Easter Sunday. All that next week is their Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that's part of the celebration of the Exodus. The Feast of Pentecost, also called the Feast of Weeks. Some calendars have on June the 5th, Whitsunday. If you have an Anglican calendar, it will be on that. That's the day of Pentecost. 7 Sabbaths after Passover, the next day, that Sunday on our calendar, is Pentecost. Anybody know what happened on Pentecost? They'd be on their calendar, Sivan the 6th. On our calendar, this year it's going to be June the 5th. In Tishrei the 1st is the Feast of Trumpets. On the 10th, the Day of Atonement. The 15th through the 21st, the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, the Feast of Tabernacles, they would go out and actually live in tents, in lean-tos, in temporary shelters, to remind them of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and living in tabernacles. Now, this raises the question, what is a tabernacle? It is any temporary, portable place of dwelling. If you have a tent and you go camping, That tent is your tabernacle. If the kids set up a quilt over the chairs in the dining room and make themselves a camp out, that is a tabernacle. If you pull out a tarp and stretch it over a limb and lay down underneath it to get out of the sun, that is a tabernacle. The tabernacle was a place built for worship. It was temporary, and it was movable. I mean, they even had portable post holes. Wish that I had them when I was growing up. Dad said, let's go build a fence today. Yeah, all day long digging post holes. I don't know how we did that. I couldn't do it now. Anyway, that's the tabernacle. But they would live in that to celebrate that time. Now, the Day of Atonement is that special day when the priest would go behind the Holy of Holies with blood, sprinkle blood on the mercy seat. The Feast of Trumpets celebrated the beginning of their civil year. They had a religious year that begins in the month of Abib or Nisan. They have a civil year that begins in the month of Tishri. On our calendar, the Feast of Trumpets is on September 26th. Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets. On the Day of Atonement, Tishri the 10th, is going to be, get my figures here, October the 5th, Yom Kippur. You want to know what that's for? That's the Day of Atonement. So you see those on your calendar. And the Feast of Tabernacles is going to be the next week in October there. Okay, now, then, they had several feasts. Now, those were all commanded by God. These are the ones the Jews invented. You think about what holidays do you remember growing up? And what holidays do we have now that we didn't have when we were growing up? Now, when I started off school, we did not have spring break. Think about that one a minute. You know, we got out for Washington's birthday, and we got out for Lincoln's birthday. Now they get out for one birthday. Sorry, kids. We may or may not got out Good Friday. Same thing today. Thanksgiving, we got out on Wednesday, went back to school on Monday. Now they get out the Friday before, and sometimes they get back on Monday. I mean, the holidays are different. We've added some. We've changed some in our lifetimes. Some of y'all don't remember that far back. That's okay. You'll grow up. But they had some feasts that were not ordained or organized or commanded by God. The Ab the 9th, which on our calendar is going to be in the middle of, near the end of July, they celebrated the destruction or honored the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar. On Kislev the 25th, they have the Feast of Dedication. You'll find on our calendar on December the 19th, Hanukkah. Antiochus Epiphanes was one of the successors of the of the Seleucids, who governed over Palestine after the death of Alexander the Great. Antiochus Epiphanes closed up the temple. He went and sacrificed a sow on the altar of God, scattered the blood all over the temple. That was complete, what's the right word here? In complete rebellion against the Jewish idea. Completely insulted the Jews. Then he boarded up the temple and wouldn't let anybody come in. There was a rebellion led by Judas Maccabeus and his brothers that kicked away or did away with the Seleucid government of the Jews. They became free. They had been under rule of the Babylonians, or the Assyrians and the Babylonians, then the Persians and the Greeks, the Seleucids, and now they're free. And 160 years or so before Jesus was born, they opened up and cleansed the temple and rededicated it. And that happened in our month of December. And so they call this the Feast of Hanukkah, or the celebration of the rededication or cleansing of the temple. And then, of course, Adar the 13th to 14th, which is going to be Wednesday and Thursday of this week. The 16th and 17th of March this year is the Feast of Purim, a month or so before Easter. So we get to celebrate Purim this week. So these are festivals that are not ordered by God, that they honor. All right. Some of these are in the New Testament. Passover. Can you name any Passover that took place in the New Testament? Can you? Answer now. Oh, come on. Louder. Which one? I still can't hear you, bud. The Last Supper was at the Passover. Any others? John points out in his gospel there are 4 Passovers that Jesus attends. And I would have guessed somebody would have said, oh, when Jesus was age 12, he got left at the temple after the Passover. Oh, I should have thought about that, right? In John 10, Jesus honors the Feast of Dedication. In Acts 2, we got the day of Pentecost. But in John 5, there is a Feast of the Jews. And the only one that it can be studied in chronology is the Feast of Purim, that Jesus celebrated in Jerusalem. How did they celebrate the Feast of Purim? They read the book of Esther on the night before and the day of Purim. They read it twice. And the rule is the book of Esther was not to be printed. It had to be handwritten on a scroll. And when they got to the names of the 12 sons of Haman, they had to be read in one breath. When Haman's name was read, everybody in the audience would grunt or growl. And the boys were given hammers or mallets, and they would strike the floor. The people would stomp their feet in disgust of the name Haman. And when the 10 sons' names were read in one breath, everybody mourned and howled and groaned and complained, like those were distasteful names to be heard. They would give money gifts to at least 2 poor people. So you would have to decide before Purim which 2 poor people or families you were actually going to walk up to and hand a gift of money. You would have to give food gifts of 2 different kinds. In other words, you get a bowl of corn and a bowl of peas, or a pound of cornbread and a carrot cake. 2 different kinds of food to one person. So you have to decide who we're going to cook for, prepare it, and on that day, give these gifts to someone else. There's a swapping going on. I'll give you my carrot cake. You give me your apple pie and the recipe. Oh, yeah, we could do that. So there's this going on. How about doing that for Easter, for Christmas? Think about it. It was a very festive feast. There was a whole lot of fun. They would put on costumes and makeup and masks. Just have a good old time. And their special food was this hamantasken. Okay, you have to eat it to pronounce it, I guess. Or osne haman. A 3-cornered pastry full of poppy seeds or some other sweets. Okay, so think of a cheese Danish or a jelly Danish or stomped on donut with a sign of jelly in the middle of it, 3-cornered. And it celebrated the elimination of Haman and his family. Okay, but what about the fasting and lamentations? Purim is the 13th and or the 14th day. Before the Feast of Purim, there would be a fast. Originally, a 3-day fast to honor the 3 days that Esther fasted before she went in to the king. And that's kind of moved down to 1 day. They would fast before the Feast of Purim. And they would lament on that day of fasting the tragedies that had befallen the Jews over the centuries. I asked a question a while ago. Why did the king have to come in and tell Esther what was going on? I think maybe she was fasting on that day, concerned for the Jews as they defended themselves. And the question might be raised, do we ever think about taking the time to spend in fasting and prayer over an issue? Just so you'll know, more than one occasion, the elders have decided, let's fast and pray over this for a couple of weeks and ask God's will. Kind of makes you think twice when you're sitting at the elders' meeting and say, I got to do that. But to answer the question ahead of time, what about the rest of Esther? Lay down my Bible and pick this up. Some of you are familiar with the book called the Apocrypha. There are 14 books that are in the Catholic Bible. They're usually sandwiched between Malachi and Matthew. The Catholic Church decided 100,000 years ago, whenever, that these books should be incorporated in the Bible. They are not inspired. They are contradictory within themselves and with the rest of the Scripture. They are more historical about what went on between Malachi and Matthew. But they give us some insight. And one of the books in the Apocrypha is called the rest of the chapters, the book of Esther, which are found neither in the Hebrew nor in the Chaldee. They are not in any of the Hebrew texts. They appear in some of the Greek manuscripts, but they are not inspired. And the rest of Esther is basically a repetition of what we've just studied. It doesn't add anything to it, just repeats it and gives some details, but it does mention God a lot. Whereas the book of Esther in the Bible does not mention God at all. However, if you've been paying attention, what caused the dread of Ezra or the dread of Mordecai? What caused the dread of the Jews amongst the people? Can it not be the great, unseen, divine hand of the providence of God? What's next? Next week, I don't know. I'll be here next week. I'm not sure what we're going to teach. If you have something you'd like for us to teach next week, just let me know. I'd be glad to do it. Just let me know by 9 o'clock Saturday night. That's why I got time to prepare the PowerPoint. If you come up at 8:45 Sunday morning, I'll have PowerPoint. Okay? I might if I push it, but it'd be hard to do. But yeah, let me know ahead of time. I'd be glad to do that. On the 27th, we're going back to Texas. My granddaughter's in a play, and we've got to go see her. April and May, we're going to take those 8 weeks or 9 weeks, because we'll actually miss a day for Easter. But we're going to study 1st and 2nd Peter. Get in the Old Testament and jump in the New Testament for a few weeks here. So that's what's coming up. Hope that but if you got any requests, let me know. And if you want a copy of the Jewish calendar, I got a copy right here, if anybody wants it. God bless you. Have a great day. Enjoy your week. We're dismissed.